Hi, everyone. This is Evan Langert with the Commercial Group. And today I want to walk with you what the leasing process should look like when it's done properly. In other words, from the moment that you call me and say, Evan, we're looking for 5,000 square feet of office space, or we're looking for a 5,000 square foot storefront, um, what should happen? Well, the first thing that a good broker ought to do is to conduct a thorough needs analysis. In my opinion, when possible, these should be done face to face. Communication is just better. Relationships and understanding of people's mannerisms in the way that they think, I think that's all better when it's a face to face scenario. But that can't always happen for a variety of reasons. And when it can't, it can be done over the phone. When a tenant comes to me, sometimes it has a really, really good idea what it's looking for. We want 5,000 square feet of space. We want it in this rental rate. We want it in this small area. And here's a layout that we're looking for, all that kind of thing. Here are the neighbors that we want to have. But most often, they're missing one or two pieces of information. In fact, most often they're actually missing a lot more than that. They're missing a lot of information. There are certain things that they haven't thought of yet. And that's natural. I've been doing this for 35 years, meaning commercial real estate. I've done hundreds of leases. I've walked through this so many times. I know a lot of things that pop up. I know a lot of things that work for people and against people. And I can suggest an awful lot of things typically that might come up or that you haven't thought about. But in order to know and to direct you properly, I have to ask you a lot of questions about your business, about your new location and why you're picking that particular area. Sometimes I can suggest an area that may actually be better for the type of clients that you're trying to serve that you hadn't thought of because you don't know that area. You pick two areas that you want to locate in primarily because you know them and you're comfortable with them, but there may be an area 20 minutes away, you just haven't frequented it. But my information that I have from my databases and all the information that I've collected over the years, that spot or that area might work even better for you than what you're thinking of. So this can all be addressed and helped by a thorough needs analysis. Once we've conducted a thorough needs analysis, we have an idea what you want in a property, then we're going to go out and look for properties. So this happens in several ways. One, I subscribe to a number of databases that are very expensive. The primary one that we use is called CoStar. There are only 1,500 CoStar licenses in the entire state of Maryland, but they're sort of the Cadillac or the gold standard as far as databases are concerned. And again, I pay several $100s a month for the privilege of having that database. I spend, $100, $200 a month for other databases too. So on the strength of that alone, I probably have access to a lot more spaces than you do as a layperson. In addition, I've been around, and other good brokers have been around for a long time. We know property owners. We know the vast majority of the brokers. Our job, in part, is to keep the pulse of the street out there. Who's moving where, who's got availability, that sort of a thing. So with our relationships, we typically know spaces that are not on the databases, don't have a sign outside, and they're not technically available, but we know that the tenant that's in this space over here is moving out in 4 months, and so that space would be available for you if you can wait that long. So these are valuable assets that we can bring you as a broker. The other thing is old school. There are always independent, smaller, usually landlords who don't know about the databases, can't afford them, or don't want to put the money out for them. And so they're not listed on them. I would say probably typically 3 to 5% of spaces. And so you have to go old school, as we say, and drive up and down the streets of the areas where your client is looking. I'm thinking of one scenario as a retail mechanic shop on Route 1 in the Beltsville College Park area. And I had been looking all over for the client. Nothing was on the databases. Nothing was coming up through the brokers that I called, and I was just driving up and down the area for the umpteenth time. And I stopped at a light, and I looked down beside me at a mechanic space, and there was a little, maybe 1 foot by 8 inch, or maybe it was 10 or 12 inch sign, and it was one little stake in the ground. It was drooped over like that. You couldn't even see it. And in my mind, I thought, is there any chance that that's a for lease sign? And so I pulled into the parking lot. I flipped up the sign, and the numbers were so faded on it that I couldn't even accurately write down the phone number. I got most of it, but there were a couple of situations. I think I had to make 3 or 4 phone calls because I was like, is this a 6 or an 8? Or is that a 3 or an 8? And I had to call a variety of different numbers to finally get the owner. Well, we ended up leasing that space, and my client is in there growing, thriving 5 or 6 years later, I think it actually is. And so you got to dig. You can't just sit at your desk, look through your databases, and send these out, your spaces out to a client. That's a little bit lazy, and it's not going to yield the best results. But once we've found spaces, how we act next will depend on how many spaces we found. In some searches, they're so particular, there might only be 2 spaces that are possibilities for you. And if that happens, I'm going to call the brokers and or the property owners. I'm going to find out as much about those spaces as I possibly can. If it's 4 or 5 or 10 spaces, I can do the same thing. However, when you get into a larger search, or there might be 30 or 50 or 70 or even 100 spaces that might work for you, depending on how wide your search parameters are, and how common or uncommon your search parameters are. There could be 100 spaces, there could be 50 spaces. So it would take hours and hours and hours to call every one of those spaces and to find out everything there is to know about the building. And that's not worth a broker's time. It's wasteful. A lot of these people aren't going to call you back. You'll call them 5, 6 times. Or they're not going to be available. So in those situations, what we all do is we'll send you a report of all those spaces, and we ask you to take a look at all of them. And maybe there are 5 or 10 or whatever the number might be of those spaces that appeal to you. Let us know what those are, and then we will call the other spaces and we'll get all the salient information for you, and then we can narrow it down. Once we've picked out the properties that you want to see, the spaces that you want to see, we'll arrange a tour. Sometimes that's a one-day thing, but brokers that have been around a while and prevalent commercial real estate coaches, industry people will tell you that it's best not to see more than 4 or 5 properties in a day. People get analysis paralysis, they get confused, they get overwhelmed, and it's typically not the best way to do things. If you want to see all the properties in one day and you have more than that, we'll do that. I don't have any problem doing that. And sometimes you have to. Sometimes somebody works 6 days a week in their business and they've got one day off, and that's when they need to see the properties. Otherwise, it's going to be another week or 2 before they can see the other properties. In other situations that I've had, a client might be flying in from wherever, Florida, Los Angeles, New York, wherever else. Connecticut was a recent one for me. And they're in town for 24 or 36 hours, and there's no choice but to show them all the properties that you could possibly show them within that time period, because they're going to make a choice and they're not coming back. So again, exceptions to the rule. Once that happens, we'll go and we'll see the properties that you are interested in. And I'll keep looking, by the way, in case things pop up while we're still in the process. And then we'll submit letters of intent for a few properties or a couple of properties. And that letter of intent will be anywhere from 2 typically to 5 pages. It will have a lot of the different topics that will be part and parcel of your lease. And the purpose is, most of them are business topics. Some of them are not. Increasingly, landlords are sticking legal topics into their letters of intent. And we'll negotiate the business terms and the other items that are on the letter of intent. These are non-binding documents. Attorneys are typically not involved yet. One of the reasons that they're non-binding is because attorneys aren't involved yet. The intention, a primary intention of letter of intent is to knock out negotiating a number of these terms before attorneys are involved, because attorneys charge by the hour and brokers don't. So as soon as a landlord generates a lease form, they've paid an attorney to do that typically. And then as soon as a tenant takes that lease form and sends it to their attorney for comments to the lease, the tenant is incurring legal fees. So the letter of intent is intended to get us as close to on the same page in as many topics as we possibly can before we start to generate a lease. Again, they're non-binding, so you are not obligated until a lease is signed by both parties. On the other hand, the landlord is not obligated until the lease is signed by both parties. So if you're out there and you're a tenant and we're looking and we're negotiating letters of intent, or even into the lease process once the attorney's generated the lease, sometimes a better space will pop up. And there are tenants that decide when that happens to say, I'm sorry, landlord, I know that you've spent time and potentially money on this, so have I, but this other space has popped up and it's just a better space for me. I've got to go with that one. By the same token, occasionally it happens where a landlord is settling for a tenant that's not the ideal tenant for the space. And along comes during the LOI process or even the leasing process, the ideal tenant, and they want the space. So occasionally a landlord will say, I'm sorry, Mr. or Ms. Tenant, but we've got the ideal tenant that just came to us and we're going to have to go with that person. Usually, once a lease has been generated by an attorney, both the landlord and the tenant feel like they've got a moral obligation to try to finish that deal. But nobody's legally obligated at that time, and either party would be free to go somewhere else if they so desired. For that reason, you should never stop looking for spaces, and frankly, for other reasons, you should never stop looking for spaces during the process. I had a situation pop up maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We had completely negotiated everything, and we were getting a lease generated, and actually that lease, the comments were being looked at and addressed by the attorney. During that process, the landlord generated a new drawing of the space to us, and in looking at that drawing, there was a shared vestibule with another tenant. Now, my client was a law office, and that meant that the tenant was going to have access to the law office's space, and that was something that the law office couldn't deal with. So we objected, and the landlord did another design. The other tenant was a bigger tenant, so they got the landlord's favor. And the redesign involved taking about 150 square feet off of the tenant's space to create a separate hallway leading to the exit for my tenant, my client. That was unacceptable. It made their space too small and their layout didn't work. So, I mean, had we stopped looking for spaces, we would have wasted a ton of time. Still, we wasted time because we went all the way down the road with a space that ended up not working. But if that happens to you and you're not even looking out for other spaces or don't have a backup or two, then that can really hurt you. So it's always recommended that that happens. And once the lease is negotiated, there are a lot of brokers that disappear from view because that's what needed to happen for commission to be generated. A good broker doesn't do that. In most cases, there's build out that has to happen. Either a tenant's doing work in the premises before they open, or a landlord is doing work for the premises before they open. A good and knowledgeable broker should ride with you. They might not take the lead role, but they should ride with you and add their knowledge and their expertise throughout the permitting process, throughout the build out process until you're opening, and then they're smiling at you at your grand opening. So there you have it. That's a properly executed leasing process. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If you want to know anything about your own particular situation, or if you'd like to engage us as brokers and or attorneys. Again, I'm a longtime practicing attorney. I don't do that much anymore, but I do sometimes as an accommodation for my existing clients. call me at 443-529-0505, 443-529-0505, or email me at elangert@thelangertgroup.com. That's elangert@thelangertgroup.com. Elangert is ELAN as in Nathan, GERT as in Thomas. Have a great day and God bless.